Alright, so I'm going to probably make this the last video on the G85, certainly on the image stabilization issue. And I have just some more, one more round of testing I want to do with it on the image stabilization issue. And like the other tests I've done, I'll use not only the G85 but also my older GH2, which is another micro four thirds camera. But in this test I'll add one more camera to the mix, that being the Nikon D85E, much more expensive, much higher end, definitely pro grade DSLR. So I'll use image stabilized lenses and non-image stabilized lenses in on all three cameras to test it. So again, in this particular use case, using my homemade camera mount that goes on top of the car, it's a kind of a tough case, a tough use case that worked okay with the GH2, which does not have image stabilization, but it didn't work well with the G85. So in this series of tests, again, I'm going to be testing the G85 with and without an image stabilized lens, the GH2 with and without an image stabilized lens, and the Nikon D85E with and without a VR lens, their term for image stabilization. So after the series of tests, I'll come back and do kind of a summary of my findings on it, and then, you know, that'll pretty much hopefully end the saga of the G85. So we'll see you at the end of the test. All right? Now, the way we're going to do this is my magnetic mount that goes on top of the car to mount the camera. And I have 4 neodymium magnets. I got some Gorilla Tape over the magnet so that you don't have metal to paint contact. And the tape is a little bit kind of stickier, not as slippery a surface as the magnet is. So between the very strong magnets and the Gorilla Tape, you know, it doesn't go anyplace. So this is the actual mechanism I'm going to use to mount the cameras. And before I put it on, I do need to kind of wipe, and I forgot to bring a cloth, so I'm using a flannel shirt. But you want to get rid of any of the dirt that might be on top of the roof. So now the way this works is I kind of line this up with the center of the roof, like that. I think it has to go over just a little bit more, and then down. That's it. That's all there is to it. And then to mount the camera, that just goes like that. Clamp it down, and then I have an additional kind of safety mechanism, a lanyard here, just in case the mount was to loosen off. This magnetic base isn't going anyplace. This is like super strong, so I don't have to worry about this flying off. I could drive at 100 miles an hour and it wouldn't fly off. So this is the setup, and we'll proceed to the testing. Alright, so here's the G85 with the kit 1260 lens and the IBIS system turned on. So you have lens and in-body image stabilization. And you can see it's, you know, a little jittery side to side, you know, not terribly smooth. Alright, now this is a G85 with the 25mm fixed lens on it, which does not have lens stabilization, but the camera body does. So IBIS is turned on So we're using basically just the in-body image stabilization. And I don't see any noticeable difference. Really, it's about the same. Not particularly smooth, jittery. All right, last test with a G85, and again with a 25mm lens with no image stabilization, and the IBIS system turned off, so the in-body image stabilization is turned off as well. So no image stabilization whatsoever. And once again, I don't see any appreciable difference in all three of these video clips with the G85, whether it has the image stabilized lens or not, or whether IBIS is turned on or not. Doesn't seem to make much difference. Alright, so here's the older GH2 with the 25mm lens on it. So there's no image stabilization at all. The GH2 doesn't have any in-body image stabilization, and the lens doesn't have image stabilization, so no image stabilization whatsoever. And you can see it is noticeably smoother than the G85. And it doesn't matter which operating mode the G85 is in, it's not as smooth as the GH2 with no image stabilization. And this is the GH2 with the 12 to 60 kit lens, and the lens itself has image stabilization, but the body does not. So it does have image stabilization in the lens, and you know, I don't see a whole lot of difference between the GH2 with the non-image stabilized lens and with the image stabilized lens. There may be a little difference, but it's not appreciable. And in both cases, superior to the G85. And for the final control here, this is the Nikon D800E with the 24 to 120mm VR lens, and the VR system is turned on. And it's not all that smooth either. So we got some jitter with the higher end Nikon D800. It's a much more expensive camera. The lens, it's not their top of the line lens, but the VR is the newer generation. So, but it's about the same as the G85 in my view. Maybe a tad better, but in the same ballpark. And then for the final test, once again the D800E, and this time with a 50mm fixed lens that has no image stabilization. So the camera body doesn't have image stabilization, and the lens doesn't have image stabilization. And this is much like the GH2, and perhaps the smoothest video of the entire series. So I'm not sure why this would be better than the GH2 with no image stabilization, and it's not significantly different, so it may just be a slightly greater mass of the camera and lens was the difference. Alright, so we completed the tests, and I think we've done as much as, or I've done as much as I can do on this. This particular use case I have with the camera mounted atop the car is unusual, so it's probably not representative of the average use case. And for typical users, I think the image stabilization in the G85 is more than useful, more than adequate. Bear in mind that my personal opinion on image stabilization in cameras is that it's probably more useful for still images. And, you know, when you're handheld, it will give you, and low light conditions, it will give you crisper, sharper images from a still camera. But with video, it's not a snapshot. You've got a continuous, you know, process, and things change. My personal opinion is, for video, your best bet to get smooth video is either using a tripod, in which case image stabilization is not only not necessary, it's not desirable, or a stabilized gimbal like a DJI Ronin or something similar to that. So if you're doing more professional kind of work, you're going to want an image stabilized or stabilized gimbal assembly. Probably is your best bet. That's going to give you your smoothest video, and I'm not real certain in the when using a stabilized gimbal if you'd want to have image stabilization turned on in the camera or lens. I suspect not. So for video, the image stabilization probably has its best use for more casual video shot handheld. You're not going to get great video like that, you know, because you're not going to be able to hold it as smoothly, particularly if you're walking around. If you're kind of stationary handheld, you know, you can do a pretty decent job for smoothness, unless you've got, you know, like tremors or something. But if you're walking around, you know, you're not going to get smooth video unless you're using one of the stabilizing systems. And I think the stabilized gimbals are your best bet. The kind of mass-based steady cams, which basically make use of moment of inertia to dampen out motions, that helps, as is connecting the camera to, say, the top of a tripod and then walking around with a tripod using the tripod as basically a steady cam. That helps, but you're not going to get perfect video from that. So working from a tripod is preferred. Working with a stabilized gimbal is the hot setup. So from an image stabilization standpoint, I think for general use the G85 is perfectly fine. So it's unfortunate for my particular use case that it just isn't going to work out for mounting on top of the car. Perhaps I can come up with some way of dampening that on my mount, but that would be my issue, not yours. So again, I think the G85 is adequate for image stabilization for the general user, and that leaves a question about how the G85, as far as the other aspects, you know, image quality, the menu settings, the performance of the camera as a basic video capture device. And it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I think the image quality is really good, again, working from a tripod. But, you know, this isn't Panasonic's flagship camera. This is not the GH4 or the upcoming GH5. So, you know, you're basically the price point is about half of what the GH series cameras are. So they're not going to include all the bells and whistles they do with the GH series camera. Why would they? So, you know, given the price point that this camera is aimed at, roughly half the price of their GH series camera, I think you get about what you pay for. It would be nice if it had some of the log profile kind of features that the GH series cameras have. But again, you know, they're not marketing this as a competitor to their own flagship camera. Why would they? So for a sort of mid-priced 4K video camera with still picture capabilities, I think G85 is a good choice. Probably not the best choice, but a good choice. And it works in my case because I already have a range of micro four thirds lenses from my previous GH2 experience. So although there are other cameras, you know, some of the Sonys, Canons, and etc., that would be in the same market, possibly even a little better in terms of video quality, image quality, and often more expensive too. So taking that into account and the fact that I already have micro four thirds lenses, the G85 was the right fit for me. I would have preferred the GH5, and I have been waiting basically a year for that, but you know, when Photokina came out in October-ish, I think it was, and they said you know, it was going to be another 6 to 9 months, you know, at that point I said, okay, I can't wait any longer, I need to get a 4K camera. So the G85 was it, and I'm not unhappy with the decision. It gives me good image quality, even if it's lacking some of the color profiles that would be more desirable for more professional use. So all in all, you know, I don't want to give it a, you know, a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of thing. I like the camera. I'm not going to send it back. It's too late for that anyway. But you know, in my use case with the mounted on top of the car, obviously a disappointment there. But for most every other user, the image stabilization is adequate. It's comparable to what others are out there, including, for example, the Nikon D800E, which is, you know, basically a step down from their really high-dollar flagship camera. And the D800E, I paid $3,300 just for the body 4-something years ago. So, you know, it's the image stabilization in the video case that I used is comparable with the Nikon, the G85 is, that is. So, hopefully this video has been of some use to you, and again, for more casual users or for people not doing the kind of use case I have, I think for if you're in the market for, say, mid-priced camera, can't quite afford the, you know, the flagship cameras, the G85 is probably as good a choice as you can make. And then really, it breaks down to, do you have lenses or other accessories that are compatible with it? Or is another camera, say from Canon or Sony or whatever, do you have lenses or accessories that would be compatible with that, that would tend to drive you in that direction? So that's kind of how it breaks down for me. The fact that I had micro four thirds lenses lent me towards the G85, and I'm not unhappy with the decision. So thanks for watching, and good shooting.